I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. And I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News sports writer Jeff McDonald, fresh from the Spurs 93-108 loss to Tony Parker and the Hornets. So, Jeff, obviously, a loss isn't great for the Spurs or their fans, but still a good situation, I'd say, for many, with the return of Tony Parker to San Antonio, who, unlike another former player who recently returned to Alamo City, was a welcome sight for Spurs fans.
Yeah, it was a complete 180 from earlier this month when Kawhi Leonard came in here with Toronto, and the AT&T Center was sort of howling for blood, and there was this hint of anger, this cloud of anger hanging over the arena. Tonight was a love fest, and as expected, and as it should be for a player that spent 17 seasons here and won 4 championships here, and really grew up here and became a future Hall of Famer here, and as is a part of this fabric of the city, one of the fabled Big Three in Tony Parker. And um, I think they gave him a tribute before the game. I think fans cheered when he scored. It was just like old times, right on down to Tony Parker's team left the AT&T Center with a victory. Except for this time, he was not wearing silver and black. He was wearing the Charlotte Hornets jerseys, which I'm never going to get used to.
Yeah, those aren't attractive jerseys, I got to say.
Well, they're weird on Tony Parker. Like it's sort of like, you know, Patrick Ewing in a Sonics jersey or Hakeem Olajuwon in a Raptors jersey. I'll just never get used to Tony Parker wearing anything but Spurs colors. But he is in Charlotte now, and he didn't play super great tonight, but he had a kind of vintage Tony Parker-esque spurts in the fourth quarter, and his team got the victory at the Spurs' expense. And I think for Spurs fans, I think there's no question if you had to lose one of these kind of comeback games this month, between Kawhi Leonard coming back with Toronto and Tony Parker coming back with Charlotte, I think you lost the right one. I think Spurs fans wanted to win them both, but if you had to lose one, you'll take losing to Tony Parker any day of the week.
Yeah, I don't think there was like a lot of cursing in the parking lot after the game or anything, because I completely agree with you. I was actually just about to ask that question, so great minds think alike. But that being the case, if there was any debate still to be had, because I think the point has been made already, but if there was still some debate to be made, does this really show how Kawhi Leonard didn't handle his change of teams as well as he could have? Because you have two players, obviously, Tony Parker, very different than Kawhi Leonard. But if Tony Parker had acted or not spoken, as we've talked about here on the podcast, in the way that Kawhi Leonard did, maybe he wouldn't have been greeted this way. I think this is just a definitive look at this. When anyone says, oh, the Kawhi Leonard hate is not useful, it's not deserved. Well, look what happened with two different players who acted very differently.
Yeah, with Kawhi, it was very much a forced exit, an untimely exit in the middle of a contract. I think, Spurs fans and Spurs management were counting on Kawhi Leonard to be the centerpiece of a championship team going forward. With Parker, I mean, if you're a huge Tony Parker fan and you're just incensed that Tony Parker is no longer playing for the Spurs, I mean, then your ire should be directed, to Spurs management, who really didn't go out of their way to bring him back. Not to say that they should. I mean, they offered him a contract, but there just wasn't a role for him here like he wanted. He wasn't ready to be your third point guard at the end of the bench, only in that mentorship role with not a lot of minutes. He felt like he had some basketball left to play, and Charlotte was willing to offer him that as the number 2 point guard. So I think they were gracious to see him go. His contract was up too. It wasn't like he forced his way out of town. He had a choice. That's what free agency is for. You can choose to leave. He took a better offer. I think Spurs fans understand that. What I did like about tonight is, of the Spurs big three, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, for as long as Tony Parker was here, he was sort of the clear-cut number 3 in the pecking order as far as fan favorites go. I think when the Spurs would lose in the playoffs, a lot of times Tony Parker got the brunt of the fans' ire. I think probably he might be one of the more underappreciated Hall of Famers in NBA history. If he had played um, for New York and done or Los Angeles and done the things he did for the Knicks or the Lakers and had the same resume, he would be on a pedestal among the all-time greats. And Spurs fans kind of had a love-hate relationship with him for a while. He was sort of the little brother of that group. So it was nice tonight for it just to be this outpouring of love and affection and a chance for Spurs fans to express what Tony Parker meant to them, as part of that championship era. And I think, if anything, it was just a night full of nostalgia. It was a nostalgic night, kind of just rekindled, especially the video before the game, just rekindled all those old championship moments, not just involving Tony Parker, but it also, the ghost of Tim Duncan was there tonight. The ghost of Manu Ginobili was there tonight, and I think fans really latched onto that. It was a goosebump raising moment to start the game tonight. I think it was deserved for Tony Parker. It was nice for him to get that, even if he was wearing the opposing team's jersey.
Yeah, weird looking jerseys. And even at the end of the game when it was over, I mean this was a not a close game at the end. There was some chanting and he came back in the game.
Yeah, put him back in, let him soak in his moment, and got to hug with Greg Popovich and kind of just soak it in. His it must have been bizarre for him to have played 17 seasons in one place and then to come back as the opponent in that gym. Different locker room, different side of the different bench. Um, it was a really interesting night, just like the Kawhi Leonard night was, but for reasons that are like 180 degrees removed from one another.
Let's get back to the game. The Spurs are not looking as good as they were when they recently had that 5-game winning streak. What are your thoughts on this? Obviously, still missing some players. Recently on the podcast, we discussed the fact that the NBA schedule might be getting to the team, but maybe losing that winning streak wasn't the end of the world. Things look slightly different now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a combination of all those things, and I think every NBA season just kind of has these peaks and valleys. This team just seems more susceptible to them than maybe other teams. Just inconsistent. I mean, a few weeks ago we're talking about, not even a few weeks ago, maybe a week ago, we're talking about the Spurs as one of the hottest teams in the NBA. They've battled their way. They won whatever 14-17, battled their way up to back into the playoff picture, and now they've lost 3 of 4. And the one that they won in there was a double overtime that they most certainly could have lost as well. So, they're kind of back in that downswing and having to try to find their way out, and certainly not having their full complement of players hurts. Rudy Gay has been in and out this year, but we've talked about it, I think, a lot, that he's a really important part of what the Spurs do on both ends of the floor. If you're talking about, tonight where things kind of got offensively out of sync, or you go through these dry spells offensively, he's a guy that at times can get you easy points, either posting up or by hitting some of those mid-range jumpers. He's a very skilled offensive player, and he's also important to what they do defensively because he's one of the few guys with length and wingspan out there on the perimeter, and he can switch and guard all kinds of different positions. And so not having him, which they haven't now for a handful of games, it's really taxing on the rest of the roster. And then they were without Marco Bellinelli tonight, who has kind of been an important part of that winning streak. He's been kind of red hot shooting the basketball. And he's another guy, if you look at a game like tonight where the Spurs would have these dry spells and these fallow periods offensively, he's a guy that, had he been available, might have hit you a three-pointer or two, or as it was the other night against Oklahoma City, 3 in the span of a minute, and kind of shake you out of that funk. And he wasn't available. And I think what we're seeing with the Spurs team is, and it's probably true with most teams in the NBA, is they need all their horses to really be as good as they can be. They might be able to sneak by a game here or there, missing an important player or two, but this is a team that I think, when it's playing well, is more than the sum of its parts. And then you start taking some of those parts out, and it's just a lesser team that's going to have to work harder to win games. So getting some of these guys back, however long that takes, will certainly be helpful. But also, I would point out they're not the only team in the NBA that deals with injuries. I think any team you play on any given night has a guy out here or there. So it can't really be an excuse, even though, it is probably a fair reason to point out why it's been more difficult for the Spurs to win over the past week or so than it was previously.
So that was tonight's game. Just speaking with you now after you've gotten back from that contest. Looking forward to some road games coming up here for the rest of the month. And also just general thoughts on what the NBA is looking like.
The next game coming up, I believe, is Wednesday. Is that right? In Dallas. And that's going to be a really interesting game. The Mavericks are uh, a very middling. If you look at their record, they're a very middling team. They're not a team that would be in the playoffs right now, if I'm not mistaken, but they're almost unbeatable at home. I think they've lost like 3 games at home this year. So they're going to be tough to beat in Dallas. And one of the reasons is this rookie they've got, Luka Doncic. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who is probably going to be the rookie of the year and might even make the All-Star team. He's just been a guy that has been on fire, a guy that the rest of the league doesn't really know what to do with right now. I mean, he's sort of turning the league on its ear with his ability at his size to make plays all over the floor. And the Spurs saw him once earlier this year. He was just kind of not really hit his stride yet at that point. I think it was in November they played and beat Dallas in San Antonio. But every time you look up now, he's doing just something amazing against somebody. And he's 19 years old also. That is doing things that he's got like Steph Curry in all of them and stuff like that. And he's going to be a handful for the Spurs to deal with because I don't think they've seen him with this kind of confidence. And it's just interesting because we were talking about it today with some of the players and coaches about how the league has changed. Maybe this is a guy, Luka, that 10, 15 years ago doesn't go in the top 5 of the NBA draft. There was sort of a stigma against European players. They're soft. They won't play defense. They won't adapt to the NBA game. And the Spurs are kind of one of the teams that help kick down that door when you start hitting on Manu Ginobili with the second to last pick in the draft because people have this kind of stigma against international players back in 1999. Spurs got a Hall of Famer with the second to last pick. That's how you keep, dynasties going. They got Tony Parker late in the first round, kind of for the same reason. So the Spurs were a team. They're not the only team, but they're a team that sort of broke down the door. Decades later, for a guy like Luka Doncic to be top draft pick and a guy that's paying off immediately for the Dallas Mavericks. So that's what's going to be interesting about that game to me. And then if you look at the Spurs' upcoming schedule as a whole, they're really back on the road again for a stretch. I think they've got like 4 out of the next 5 are on the road, and we're not really sure what to make of the Spurs as a road team yet. If you go back to November, December, they were pretty much awful anytime they left the 210 area code. They seem to have gotten a little better in that regard. They've actually won some road games here in their last couple of trips. Certainly showed up even in the losses. The last time they were on the road, though, was at Memphis against the team you thought they were going to beat. Memphis had not been playing well. Wasn't very it just was in a down stretch for them. And then the Spurs go out there and just kind of drop an egg, have their lowest scoring game of the season, and lose that one. So we're not really as inconsistent as the Spurs have been overall. They're really inconsistent on the road, and that's something that if they don't right that in the next couple of weeks or this next stretch of games, they're going to be right back down there near 500 again after they seem to have broken through with that big winning streak they were on.
All right, Jeff. Well, I'm going to let you go. Appreciate the long night, but I will give you a chance for final thoughts once again. Seems like the loss, not a huge deal. Everybody's happy that Tony Parker was back in San Antonio. Final thoughts.
Yeah, it was a fun night overall just to be a part of. It wasn't quite like the jersey retirement night like we did Duncan's a couple years ago. We'll have Manu Ginobili's jersey retirement coming up in March, which those are really emotional, goosebump, tear-jerking nights. This one was a little bit different just because Tony Parker's still playing, and I think that was the odd thing about all of it. When you talk those big 3 guys, Tim Duncan, never came back in another jersey. Manu Ginobili never came back in another jersey. This was a really unique night um, that you're not going to have this night again, where it's one of your big three coming back for the first time wearing somebody else's colors. So I think that's what made it a special night, and it was just, as I mentioned earlier, just a nice night for San Antonio to show Tony Parker what he meant to them when they didn't all, as a group, didn't always maybe show him when he was wearing number 9.
And a big thank you to San Antonio Express News sports writer Jeff McDonald for working late tonight to join me on today's episode of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.